Hello, and welcome to Fire Subscriptions for Connectathon 28. My name is Gino Canessa. Today we have one more tooling demo walkthrough before we get into some more coding. This is using some manual configuration to send requests, kind of like you would use Postman if you're familiar with that, or curl to send requests, but kind of a walkthrough and some tooling to help that happen. So with that said, let's jump right in. What we're going to be using today, and as always, links below, we're going to start with Visual Studio Code, and we're going to use this REST client extension. As you can see here, it's got almost 2 million downloads and a nice 5-star rating. So it's well earned, in my opinion, from using this. There's documentation at the link. There's documentation here as well, just when you bring up the extension in VS Code. But essentially, it just lets you bring out requests and execute them. So we'll show you how here in a minute. I do have a repo here that I've cloned locally, subscriptions test scripts, again, link below. But this has the commands that we'll want to use in order to do all of this. So in this case, I have it broken up into 2 folders, FireServer ID only and an Endpoint ID only. So first we'll look at the FireServer one. The files that we're actually using are these, they're .http, you can also use .rest, and then there are some supplementary JSON files. So let's do this so we can go through here. These files are the files that are being used by the extension. Comments can be the / or the hash mark. @ signs are used around variable declarations, and the variable usage is kind of this handlebar style, if I'm remembering correctly, but it's the double brace. So here at the top of the file, I just have a bunch of kind of configuration variables defined. You can see a Fire endpoint. This is the one we're going to be hitting since we're doing the remote, the FireServer one. Canonical topic, notification URL, patience, all the reference linking, everything works to see where it's used, all these kinds of fun things that you get in VS Code. The nice thing here is, since these are checked in, you can download these and just update your FireServer URL, your notification URL, things like that, and use them directly. So it saves a lot of effort in trying to craft all of these things. There's the get metadata one, but that's a slower call. So we'll go ahead and do get subscription topic. And you can see we just click send request. And you can see here we have all of our HTTP information, our returned headers, and then the returned content. We did specify it's application FHIR plus JSON, but here it's interpreting as JSON, which is close enough for display that we're using. I will note, I missed this one in the syntax. There's this special hashtag and then the variable declaration. Name is the only one I've seen that does that, but it gives some extra directives here when we want to reuse things later. So we'll get to that when we get to an example of it. But you can see in this case we just did a get to our Fire endpoint URL. Again, that's the one substituted from up there. / subscription topic. In this case, I specified HTTP 1.1. You don't have to do that. You can leave this off and rerun the request. And in this case, it's still using the default HTTP 1.1. You can see here it returned our bundle search set with an entry. It has one entry because we have one topic on this particular server. And all the things we would expect in it. We can do the same thing. We can get a list of patients. You can see right now the server has 8 patients on there. And that's not all that much more interesting. Create subscription. This one is a little bit more interesting. So we can see here we have some new syntax. And this is for inserting a file. So that's what I was saying. We had these related JSON files earlier. If we remove the @ sign, that'll just send the JSON file as is, as the post content. With the @ sign, it's telling it to go and replace variables. So I'll close that for a second. We can see if we look in the subscription request file that we have named there, we just have the relative path. You can see that we have the normal Fire JSON that we would expect, But we do have things like the notification URL here. So this is going to get replaced by the variable declarations we have in the main file. Same thing with topic canonical, and as we scroll down, same thing with the filter here as well. So this lets us preform these files. You can edit these files, you can change them, and make them useful for your testing without going too crazy on kind of the overhead that you would need for it. We could define variables for things like ID only versus full resource and keep going on, but again, this is an example, a place to get started. So we can see when we send this post, we actually get back our 201 created with all of our headers, and we can see the location and everything else. Now, we don't have the ID because we just did a post, but we can see the ID is here. And that's where this name comes into play. So you can see we named this call create subscription. And then down here, when we want to do like get subscription status, we can make a variable that's local inside this call that is pointing to this same create subscription. And then we're going to grab the response of a call, look at the body, and grab the ID field. So in this case, we're saying, okay, after this call has been run, if you try and run it before, it just doesn't do the substitution because it doesn't know what that is until you run it. But we want to grab the response. The body, again, is the same thing we see here. And then, since this is just interpreting as normal JSON, we can just reference the ID field, and away we go. So you can see when we send this request, it is doing everything we expect and getting back that subscription that we just created. So we can see, we can go do these things, we can delete the subscription, it does the same thing. Or in this case, we can send an encounter. And you can see here that we're just going to, same thing, we have an encounter request JSON file that's pretty straightforward, but again, you can customize it because that's the beauty of doing it in this style. Change whatever you want and send it. In this case, we will go ahead and send the request. And then you can see 201 created, that everything is there. Perfect. So that is for seeing this ID only version, or going to the FireServer with ID only. Now, we can see the same thing if we come here and we want to go directly to the endpoint. So I have similar script set up here. There's, again, you can see I have the JSON files for a bundle that would be a handshake. So we can see that this is a handshake. And we have one that is an event notification. So we've set up the JSON files for them. We have some variables in place. We can come here. I will note this does use this date time ISO 8601 format. So that's a format that's compatible with the FireServer spec. And we can see here we have the same thing. Let me restart here. I just realized I have the wrong URL here. Let's see if this is available. Nope. So over here I have a window that's just giving me the a public URL that I can go to, and this is just a listener that posts or displays on the screen anything that we're going to post to it. So in this case, when we go ahead and say, for instance here, we want to post the handshake. Again, we're just posting it to the notification URL. We can see it was a 204. And if we look in our window, we can see it received a post and it has this bundle that we just did. So this bundle matches the handshake bundle that we got here. Now you can see it did put in, for instance, the date time. It did put in a full URL based on the FireServer URL that we put in the file. It went and filled out the topic and things like that. So that's all working as expected. And then we can do the same thing here, and we can post an event. We have a patient ID, we have some event numbers. So for instance, if we want event 1, when we send the request, we can see that we received history bundle. That's an event notification. It had event number 1 or encounter number 1 on patient pat 1, and all of the links and everything else filled out as we would expect. And that's just based on this JSON file that I actually pulled it from the reference implementation first, and then changed all of these things to variables that I would want. But here you can see we added things, so we can say, let's change event number to 2 and the encounter ID to 2. And then when we send that through, we get another one. We can see here's encounter 2, and this is event number 2. So this lets you test things. If I want to say this is, now I'm receiving encounter 5, for instance, if I wanted to test receiving things out of order, that notification shows up and I can see that I received 2 and then 5. So I would be able to put in and test my detection logic for getting things out of order, different things like that. But again, this is just a very basic listener that's just displaying this on the screen. So with this tool, again, you can go and test both a FireServer server that has subscriptions. You can test your REST endpoints, things like that. But it's just a much more manual, deterministic way of doing it. But it's also more flexible because you can go and fill out those resources however you want and change different things to see how your clients respond. So with that said, the next video we'll actually go through building that REST endpoint, and we'll add in some parsing and things like that. And then we'll jump over to WebSockets probably after that. So again, hope this helps. Hope to see you at the Connectathon soon. I believe it's next week at this point. So have a great day and cheers. Thanks.